Hey, how's it going, Ryan?
How we doing, Mike? Good seeing you.
Good seeing you. It was great to hang out with you in San Diego for a little bit.
Yeah, always good times down here. Obviously, world's in a crazy stage right now, but it was good you got to come down and visit before it got too hectic, and glad we're still able to work together a bit.
Not only that, I was just thinking that maybe the LA Sevens was probably the last largest rugby gathering uh, that happened since COVID-19.
Oh, for sure. Like, I mean, they've gotten it going, Super Rugby going again in New Zealand and Australia, but like as far as on North American soil, and yeah, I definitely was thinking that was a pretty good sized gathering, and everything hit pretty soon after that. I remember quarantine only hit like 2 weeks after that, and I was
Right.
definitely thinking like, whoa, we were in the mix for sure.
Yeah, and it was so much fun. It's so crazy to think that we didn't worry about any of that kind of stuff. We were all packed into the Rugby Nation party, and we were all just having a good time. And
Yeah,
times certainly have changed for sure.
definitely on the radar at that time for sure.
Well, I'm super excited to, and I'm just going to change my microphone here to make sound a little. But I super excited to have you and to have this conversation with you about strength and conditioning, about what we're doing at Rugby Nation. I would love for people to get to know you better. So it's really interesting that strength and conditioning coaches are usually lesser known, and they're kind of in the background, but they're actually such a critical component to uh, to athletes and to their performance and to success. Um, so let me do this real quick. I'm going to introduce you to our audience. So Ryan Gallop is the lead performance coach for Rugby Nation. I was introduced to him by Todd Clever, former team captain for USA 7s and 15s, um, and uh, and also Carlin Isles, and they speak very highly of Ryan Gallop. Um, and as I got introduced to him, we started talking, and we realized how how incredible it would be to actually create a relationship and a partnership so that the goals for Rugby Nation uh, could happen. And the goals for Rugby Nation, just to remind people who don't know about this, is I started a Rugby Nation. I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, and never really knew what was going to come of it. I remember interviewing Carlin Isles with my little iPhone on one side of the room while ESPN was on the other side of the room with an entire crew. And I was just so passionate about rugby, and I wanted to grow the sport of rugby. I just didn't know how to do it. So I started a Rugby Nation, started building it. Then I finally realized at some point that the way to build it is to sponsor Olympic hopefuls and to sponsor and support Olympic hopefuls and pro athletes, and was able to generate some income for Carlin Isles before he went and played in the Olympics in Brazil. Um, Super happy and excited about that. But now the focus has been on a, on something that I've seen in rugby that's there's a big gap. You have a skills coach, but you don't have a strength and conditioning coach most times. And if you do, most likely they're not as well qualified as somebody as Ryan Gallop. So the purpose for Rugby Nation is to help to grow the sport of rugby through fitness, through strength and conditioning training. Um, Ryan, I would love to hear your story about how did you get into rugby, first of all, and then let's get on to other topics.
For sure. So I'm from the tip of Long Island, New York. There's actually a really good Montauk Rugby, and they had a high school club that they had created, and myself and a lot of our friends, we all played the high school sports. So football in the fall, either wrestling or basketball or track in the winter, and then track or baseball in the spring. But as I got through high school, going in junior year, I was very serious about football and track. I loved them. I trained for them as much as I could with the limited amount of coaching we had. But I also, I was a physical late bloomer. I was always fast and quick and like athletic, but I was small. And I was realistic enough to know like college football, I think I probably had the skills, but not the body junior and senior year. And I filled out eventually, but not in high school. And I loved track. I loved long jump, but I did not really want to do that year round at a college, knowing how challenging the academic side or even how fun the social side could be. I wasn't sure I loved track enough to do it year round. But I didn't know any of that until junior year. A bunch of us in my grade, and we knew some of the older kids playing, we went out and played rugby. Now, almost all of us, junior and senior year, were doubling up in the spring. We had our full-time school sport of either track or baseball. And then twice a week after those practices, we'd go into the park in East Hampton town and practice for 2 hours playing rugby. I wish I had that energy nowadays. I was literally sprinting for probably like 4.5 hours straight and was not tired. It was crazy. But yeah. What I learned through rugby is, man, I love this sport. And it was a new sport. Most other sports I'd grown up playing and wanting to play. So all of a sudden discover a sport at like 16 years old. And, the big team atmosphere of it, I was playing with all my friends. There were no outsiders. We all knew each other. And senior year, we played again. And it was like, I have a twin brother, Mike. He fell in love with it too. Senior year, he's the scrum half. I'm the fly half. We're like running the show, having a ball. We were a decent team. We were just a bunch of good athletes. So we didn't really know how to play rugby well at that point. But I started thinking like, this is what I want to do in college. And a big part of that was the men's club. And we played sevens with them in the summers and touch rugby. But those guys were like the beasts of our town. And they're still playing high level sevens and going to nationals. And they're all like in their 20s and 30s. And I was like, that's what I want. I at that point, I was like, I'm not gonna be a pro athlete, but I love sports. And I don't want to play a sport like track where at 21 years old, if you're not going to the Olympics, you're retired. Like that didn't appeal to me. Football I knew was out of reach just from my natural limitations. So rugby became it. I was like, I'll play through college. I'll chase it after college. Like I saw it had longevity, and that was powerful to me. Like, and I knew these guys, how serious they treated it. No one's getting paid. It's club, but these guys they trained hard. They had their fun. But, they wanted to win, and they represented our town. And it was our town, even people who didn't know any of the players or even go watch games, but everyone knew like, hey, Montauk Rugby Club's no joke. And those dudes are badass. That like appealed to me. I was like, oh, I'll own one of those guys someday. So, and in a twist of fate, our high school coach, Rich, he was at some random Northeast, I think it was a sevens tournament in the beginning of the summer after I was graduating high school. And he met up, it was a college and men's tournament. And he met up with guys from University of Delaware and was like, hey, I got a good kid who just graduated who's going and he wants to play there. So those guys actually got my information and we interacted that summer because then, at that stage, Cal was like the only thing that was even close to a varsity college program. Everything else was club, and every other, there's D1 to D3 and seriousness levels and party levels were all over the place. But like I interacted with one of the captains who's an older guy and was like, hey, Rich spoke highly of you. And if you want to play here, like, here's where we're going to practice. Here's our first one, and we had a little contact. So when I showed up, they knew who I was. Most other freshmen were like creeping onto that grass field. Like, what the hell am I doing here? I don't know anybody. But
right.
And typical to this day, college programs, they want people who have experience in youth or high school because a lot of colleges are just starting fresh with all their new people. So myself and a couple other kids from the local area, I went to University of Delaware, and it was actually a really good high school club there. So it was me and a handful of other guys who had played in high school. So like the older kids all of a sudden were like, wow, we have a crop of freshmen who actually already know how to play. And we ended up helping the team get back onto the map over the next couple of years. And a lot of that was because we had that experience. We weren't just, football players who were like, well, I'll figure it out. We knew the game a little bit. But
And
that's when I started.
what I really enjoyed about when I met you is I like you ooze passion for strength and conditioning, and you are an expert, professional strength and conditioning coaching and training, and you do from athletes from all different sports. You absolutely love the sport of rugby, and you've played it for years. What got you into strength and conditioning, and give a little bit of background of your education and qualifications for that?
For sure. So typical. Liked working out as a kid. My dad had me and my brother, doing Arnold Schwarzenegger bodybuilding crap.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because we were skinny ass kids, so it's not like it made a huge difference. But I would do some lower body lifting and like sprints and plyos with track. And football was all upper body. We just didn't have great strength and conditioning coaching in high school. But I actually went to college for civil engineering. I was good at math and technical drawing, but didn't take more than a couple weeks before I was like, well, I seem to hate the thought of being in front of a computer on my ass all day long, which is I soon realized is what engineering is. And I was falling in love with rugby at a higher level because we were playing more and I was playing with better people and older people. But even then, I wasn't sure yet. I knew I was like training. But, 2 years into college, I already bailed on engineering. I'm taking business classes because when you don't know what else to do, just take business classes.
Mm-hmm.
And literally one winter session, which we used to have at our school because we had a 2-month gap where you could either go home or take a mini session. I took like a health and exercise science elective just to get some easy credits and it could fit into a general ed category. And it was the first time I without hesitation went to class. It was the easiest A I ever got. It wasn't necessarily a tough course, but it gave me a little feeling of, oh crap, it's possible to not dread going to class and just studying stuff that you think you're supposed to. And that was kind of it. I was at a crossroads of I know I don't want to do business, but I need to figure something out soon. And I loved a lot of my passion for strength and conditioning. That's why I chose to be in the athletic performance world. It's because I love sports. And that's what drives me, working with athletes, being involved, whether it's individual or team-based sports, but the planning and putting in the work for pretty clear-cut goals as far as achievement, succeeding in a season, winning a title, whatever those things, that drives me. I got into training like everyone else does, a personal trainer mindset to help people with weight loss or looking better. That's a lot of people's goals, general population people. But after I got a degree in health and exercise science, worked at home a little bit, played a summer of sevens and then a fall season with Montauk Rugby. And then I had a good friend from college who was like, hey, I'm going to check out San Diego. You want to go? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. I knew training was big out here. I knew club rugby was really big out here. So there were reasons that drove me. I did the personal training thing for a little bit, but once I started, I got my certified strength and conditioning specialist cert, which is the CSCS. That's kind of the gold standard. If you're going to work with athletes in America, the NSCA is the organization. You do that cert. And when I figured, all right, I want to learn this stuff for myself, because I was playing for the on-back rugby club and I was working my way up, but I knew all right, there's a lot of really good athletes here, but also some guys are just bigger and stronger than I am. And if I'm going to catch up, I got to change what I'm doing in the weight room. So I got certified in that. It was twofold. I wanted to improve myself as a player. And as I did that, it was light bulbs kept going off of crap. This stuff works. I was getting stronger and faster in my late 20s when almost every one of my friends had already retired from rugby. And I'm just getting warmed up. That was my vibes in my late 20s was they hung it up after college and they're missing out. And a lot of that was preparing the right way, knowing the difference between how you train off season, preseason, in season, and I still made a ton of mistakes when I'm younger because you can get away with it when you're younger. When I went back and played sevens the last couple of years, I was way smarter about it because I understood if I ever did it, playing national level teams when I'm in my late 30s, if I train too hard during the week and I got no gas in the tank on Saturday, then that pretty much
Right.
changed the whole point. But knowing that like proper training really did, I felt it. When I was training myself, I started volunteering for U.S.A. Rugby. That's how I met guys like Todd, Matt Hawkins. They really helped me get into the U.S.A. system, and a lot of that was me putting in extra time. They were playing for on-back. I'd run extra sessions for them. I contacted the 15 strength coach at the time, was like, hey, I'll help with the guys in San Diego. I was definitely like, I wanted to learn. And most people in the sports world and the athlete world, we learn better by doing than reading. And I had done, you study for the tests and whatnot, but I needed to learn hands-on. So we're getting my hands on their programs, helping those athletes with them, pulling some for myself, questioning some things, but that's always good. Like you always want to question what you see. You want your stuff questioned. There's no, that's what we realize now in strength and conditioning is there's not a lot of secrets left. Like a lot of it is the basics and the fundamentals, and honestly, the planning and the execution and the consistency is really what drives it. Exercise choice and arguing over reps and sets. Most guys who've been in it long enough know, like, you can make arguments for a lot of different things, but it's more of how you use it and why that makes the biggest difference.
Right.
And I just think, my passion is still here to this day because it affected me in both like my personal and my professional life. Like I've seen it work for me, and I've known in the last couple of years, there's no way in hell I could have survived those 7 seasons if I didn't prepare the right way in the spring. And when you get older, and any veteran player will tell you, especially if we're talking sevens, or if you play in the back row, or say 9 or hooker in 15s, fitness is key. You can do, and I was the guy in on back. I take pride in that we had a good strength coach, and then he left, and then it was kind of up to the players. And the one difference I made in the 2 years I helped is we ran a lot in the preseason because everybody wants. What's that?
Well, Todd Clever speaks very highly of you, and he was team captain for both sevens and 15s and played in 3 World Cups. You've done some incredible things and worked with incredible athletes. Other athletes that people's names they would recognize that you've worked with in the past?
I mean, rugby is where you're going to get like guys like I was with the U.S.A. sevens team for years or a year and a half, but I helped some of the guys before and after it privately. So like Carlin Isles, Todd Clever, Matt Hawkins, Zach Test. Those are just a few of the big name rugby guys I was working with at the time. Chris Wiles was with Todd for a year with On-Back, and he was a longtime U.S.A., one of our best backs, and he won some championships at Saracens over the years. It was great. Like, he was one of those guys who I already looked at as a pro, and he wasn't much older than me, and Todd was younger than me, but when I got to help them, and they were like the 2 brightest faces on the U.S.A. Eagles, it really helped me. Like, a lot of it was like realizing my voice. Like, hey, these guys, I'm a good player. They're great players, and I might not share the same pitch with them all the time, but if I can speak passionately about why we're doing things and, run a good session. But you realize a lot of this is relationship driven, right? Like almost every opportunity I've had in rugby is because I made relationships with the right people and genuinely helped people when I wasn't getting paid for it. That's some of the advice I give to the young guys who want to get into rugby. I'm like, well, we talk about it. We'll probably talk about it later about, the lack of a lot of strength and conditioning in rugby in America. And it's because those resources aren't there for every club team or every high school team or most college teams even to have a strength and conditioning coach in place for that team. They just don't have the funds for it. So what inevitably happens is one of the older players doubles as the strength coach, which I did a little bit when I was playing for On-Back, or an assistant coach who just loves the weight room, will write programs for guys to do on their own. And what you realize is like you can, like, players can have different styles of training, especially off season. Some guys want to get big and strong, and some guys want to get super fit with the weights. So, you know, they're doing CrossFit or like boot camp type stuff. Some guys are look good dudes. We're in San Diego. Dudes want to look good with their shirt off. You know what I mean? Instagram now has changed everything. Everybody, you know that world. Everybody wants to be on the gram, training hard and looking good. And the argument with rugby is a lot of that stuff can work during the off season. If your goal is building muscle, feeling good, looking good, you know, you have time to ramp into the season. What changes, and what I learned a ton, both from making my own mistakes and from being around smart people when I was helping with 15s or 7s guys, is that, like, as you ramp closer to the season, like, realizing what a priority practice sessions and field sessions and games really are. And the training always needs to be designed and implemented, and a lot of times changed and varied to feed into that. And if you're, you know, it's one thing, hey, if it's preseason and we're playing a couple scrimmages and we're tackling a lot in practice, but yeah, we're going to run our asses off and we're still going to lift a lot because we're trying to build up a big base of strength, power, fitness, and rugby skills under duress in the preseason before games start actually counting. And then even in the early season, we might not be fully recovered every Saturday, you know, in the first month of club season, because we're training hard, we're ramping up, we're looking at the whole year. And I feel like that's where planning and organization becomes a big thing. And even listening to your players, you know, old school coaches who say, this is how I did it, so this is how we're going to do it. That shit doesn't work. There's so many more advances. Even if you're not using tech like GPS or heart rate variability stuff, you can still listen to your players. You can have the couples captains who can show up Thursday at a session and the game Saturday and be like, hey coach, like, we're smashed. Like, the Monday lift was really hard and we ran our asses off Tuesday. We tried to do upper body recovery yesterday and we are still smashed. And it's up to, and this is at all levels, like youth all the way to pro. Coaches need to listen to that and be like, all right, we'll do is, you know, sharp, crisp, you know, maybe like skill and offense, defense flow session, kind of mimic game scenarios, but we're not covering a lot of distance, nothing too high speed. And we're going to flush it out at the end with some recovery work. And Friday we rest and eat and drink a ton of water, and then we play Saturday. But that communication side, that's where, like, I feel the biggest changes I've seen in rugby over the years is in the smart organizations, is that the player feedback, the data that you can pull if you are doing any kind of metrics, and just knowing that, you know, you can have this perfect, in a bubble wrap program, it looks freaking amazing on Excel, or if you're doing handouts, we have we use the app at NAKOA. It looks all great in there. But if you're married to that thing and you don't think that thing can change over time, then you're screwed. And that's why, even, I know we're going to talk about it later with Rugby X, but in the in-season thing, I built in, you know, volume variabilities and exercise selections, because a lot of that feeds into the human element of training and playing sports. Is we're not robots, and you can't program perfectly for a whole team, and you can't even break it up by position. There's needs that obviously scrum players need, you know, more isometric strength and total lower body, you know, maximum effort work versus your outside backs. But you can't give the same volume to one prop versus the other. One guy might thrive off of, you know, really heavy squats like every single session, and another guy's sore for 3 days every time he goes above 85%. So if you have them doing the same thing, then one guy's not working hard enough and the other guy's destroyed. So learning that's what I've loved learning. And you asked me earlier about other athletes. The other demographic I'm very well known with is action sports, which honestly couldn't be more polar opposite of rugby, but that's taught me a shitload, pardon my French, about how to work with humans. Because, you know, some of these guys, I mean, I've got guys who won X Game gold medals, have Olympic dreams, skateboarding, snowboarding. I've gotten pro surfers on tour, and these guys have all become my friends and my little brothers over the years. But because I have them in more of a private setting in NAKOA, I can have more of those one-on-one conversations with them. And you start realizing, like, it's easy for a coach to make guesses about how people feel based on, you know, and even now they're doing daily monitoring and stuff, which some of that has a lot of value, but you can't put everything on it because you don't know what's going on up top. You don't know who just got in an argument with their girlfriend, who's stressing out losing a sponsor, you know. And rugby is such a violent sport. You know, sometimes, you know, I was just having a chat with a really good strength coach the other day. He's going to be taking over for the Legion gig. And he was like, the mental recovery is way more powerful than the physical recovery a lot of the times. If you can't clear your head at whether it's after a loss or maybe you're battling for your position. I dealt with a lot of that when I was at on-back, like the constant, I want to be the starting 9 at this level. And then all of a sudden, you know, the foreign guy shows up 2 weeks before the season. Now you got new competition. Like, I was stressing club rugby more than I was stressing my job or my, you know, girlfriend at the time. Like, literally, that's how serious it was. And I wish I had people tell me back then, you got to do stuff to recover your mind. And whether it's unpack or meditate or just even sleeping well and always following the lifestyle stuff. But if you can't,
You've also trained some women pro athletes as well, right?
What's that?
You've also trained women pro athletes.
Females in all those sports too. Professional skaters, some professional surfers from Hawaii, big names. I mean, I don't know if the rugby world would know them, but they're pretty big on Instagram. But it is, you get, when you work with a diverse group, which I prefer, I don't think I ever would have loved just working with rugby, because I would never want it to get monotonous. And like, because the team world is stressful. You got more people relying on outcomes. There can be politics and blame and this and that thrown around in a team environment. So I luckily, whenever I've helped in the team setting, I've also had NAKOA and our private business where I worked with different types of athletes. And honestly, I learned a ton from each. Like, I'm better at working with the action sports individual athletes because they're built to be selfish. And I can teach them from my own experience and from the rugby world what selflessness is like, and like training your ass off for the sake of other people, even when you don't feel like it, because that's a big part of rugby. In their world, it's all about them. They're the one who has to practice. They take a lot of risk. You know, action sports is dangerous. We all know that. So they sit on all this stuff individually, and I've told them what it's like in the team environment. And sometimes you feel like crap, but it doesn't matter. You don't have a choice. Like, you show up that day, you're training with your mates, and that's just how it goes. And vice versa. I've been able to get some rugby players in here and actually train them in a little more of a laid back setting, like a private setting, like I do with, say, a group of surfers. And they actually love it because it gets them out of that like regimented team environment where, like, I mean, the energy can be great, but if everyone's beat up or you're coming off of a loss, the energy can suck. And just giving them that feel of like, hey, you can have fun with, you can train. That's a big part of my philosophy, because I've lived on both sides of that world where I make myself train when I don't want to, but I have to. And then other times where I've created some kind of fun environment. A lot of times when Zach Test was making a comeback years ago, he hit me up for help, and I was like, dude, I need an excuse to get after it this fall. Let's just train together. And we worked out together, and we were doing field sessions, gym sessions here, and we both trained harder and laughed our asses off, 2 or 3 days a week for a couple months. And that we both needed that. Zach's a phenomenal athlete who's now the coach at Legion, but Zach will be the first one to laugh and tell you he's not a weight room guy. Zach's a freak. He played college football and had a cup of coffee with the NFL, and is one of the best sevens players we've ever had. And he never loved the weight room. And that's the reality with a lot of really good athletes. So if the environment isn't fun, and also a big thing is they have to know what you're doing translates. If you're smashing people in the gym or out in field sessions where you're just gnarly running or rugby-based conditioning, people have to have buy-in. Like, please, like, show me how this helps. You know, granted, hopefully they feel it, because once the adaptations occur and, you know, practices start or games start and they're like, wow, like I'm recovering quicker between tackles, or I can get in position better, I don't get winded ever on the field, whatever it is, people have to feel the improvement. If you're a coach just telling people you're getting better, but they don't feel it on the field or on a surfboard or whatever, then it doesn't matter. Like, the power
What do you
of
think? What do you
drives.
think are some of the biggest mistakes that sports coaches make for athletes in training, strength and conditioning?
I think a big one would be just chasing numbers in the weight room. Just, you know, whether it's the old high school 1,000-pound club for your 3 lifts. You know, there are standards. You can look at a rugby player and say, all right, if you're really strong, you can trap bar deadlift 2.5 times your body weight. That's a good number, but there's going to be, you know, some stocky Polynesian boys who can do that without even training. So what are you saying? They don't need to work out? And then there's going to be skinny ass fast dudes who, if I put my effort into deadlifting 2.5 my body weight, I am sacrificing everything else to chase that number. And I'm probably going to get slower and possibly get hurt in the process. So is that really worth it if the name of the game is to be better at your sport? So I think chasing numbers is a problem. And also the classic thing I mentioned earlier, and it lives in every world. And I've had to keep up with the times to make sure I don't become that guy of, this is how we used to do it. And it's like, well, sports science and sports psychology and just data collection and analysis over the years has changed the way we train athletes for the better. And it's going to keep going. But if we say, you know, well, this is how we did conditioning when I was in college, like, I'm immediately an idiot, because that was 20 years ago and we were a bunch of kids training ourselves. And to think that there's not a better way to do that now it's absurd. And I think that's the biggest mistake when sports coaches lead training, is they want to lift super heavy in the gym and they just want to make people puke on the field. And guess what? Rugby never played in either of those worlds, really. There's, you know, nowadays in the scrum hit is a big amount. It's like a power impact, and then it's isometric. There's not a lot of movement. So where we always thought you have to have a huge squat or deadlift, there's ways to do like mid-thigh pulls or isometric squats where you're getting the push that's similar to a scrum front row. But if you're working that in the gym, you can show them how it translates. This impact and this positioning of your joints without any movement is what you're experiencing during the scrum. So that's why we're doing it in a gym, giving people that mindset. I mean, forever we believed if you could squat heavy, you'd get faster. And I intuitively never really believed that. And luckily science recently has disproven it, because a lot of really fast guys are not great squatters. Like, not everyone's Carlin Isles. He's one of the small, fast guys who can squat 500 pounds. That's not normal. There's skinny, twitchy guys who are never good in the weight room, who are the fastest, quickest, shiftiest players out there, and their coaches love them. Are you going to tell me, you know, if you grabbed one of the Fijian boys on the 7th circuit, who they do mostly outdoor crazy functional training and a little bit of weight room, if you said every guy on this team has to squat 400 pounds, you know, in the next 6 months, guaranteed you'd have injuries and some players playing worse. So then what the hell was the point? And that's where, like, you can have standards, like, you know, those like strength standards of you can squat this much of your weight, you can deadlift, but those should just be loose targets in my opinion. And it can drive programming a little bit, but you have to get that ongoing feedback. Like, I've worked with athletes who, as they got stronger, told me they feel worse on the field. They never feel like they can warm up. And granted, they might not have been whether their technique's not great or the programming wasn't right. And this is our job to look at the programming and say, shit, we're doing too much volume, or he's just not built. Like that's another thing too with biomechanics and arthropometrics, which is like limb lengths and whatnot. Not everyone's built for certain lifts. I'm super tight in my shoulders from all the rugby injuries. I was just telling some college kids I trained yesterday, I suck at back squatting. It like hurts me to back squat. If I'm going to do something really heavy, I could do like a safety bar or like an upright trap bar deadlift where I can drop it if I'm going to fail. That takes my postural tightness and limitations out of the equation. But if you have it in your head that I only use these lifts on these athletes, some athletes aren't going to fit those lifts. So that's where exercise variation and knowing like what's the movement. If we're looking for a lower body push on 2 feet or 1 foot, there's a bunch of different movements that can achieve that same action. And if you can get athletes to buy in because you give them a little variability, and also that doesn't make them feel like crap, because I've been there where it's demoralizing, where you're like, all right, I'm on phase 2 of the program and I wrote this great thing. And on day 1 of back squat, and I think I've improved my mobility and whatnot. I did this 2 summers ago, getting ready for sevens. First day of back squatting on my 3rd set, my mid back felt like I might've been seasoned up because my low back wasn't in a good position. All my ankle and hip tightness that I built up over the years and I thought I had made better was getting me. And on day 1, I went in and changed it. I was like, I can't back squat because I'm making progress everywhere else. But if I chase this back squat in this 4-week program, the way I have it written, I'm gonna backslide if not get hurt. So let's make some smart decisions here.
Yeah, these are great points. And now, so as Rugby Nation, we launched a Rugby X strength and conditioning program about a year and a half ago. And you have helped to completely regut it and start from zero and built the entire thing. There's some really interesting things that you've put in there that I'd love for you to cover. I know you've got about 10 minutes left. But what is in the new Rugby X program? And we're going to relaunch that next week. What is in the new Rugby X program? How should athletes use it? And I know, just to preface that, the reason for the Rugby X program and what I've asked you to create in there is so that rugby players from all over the world for less than $1 a day can get your expertise and to be able to to increase their power and speed on their own without having to pay for a professional strength and conditioning coach that would cost them hundreds or thousands of dollars a month or a year. And instead of just less than $1 a day, they can get all of these programs, the video demos, the workouts, anything that they need for preseason, in-season, postseason, and all those kind of things. You want to go ahead and just give a brief overview of what it has in it?
Sure. So basically, like you said, I broke it up into the kind of the season phases as you look at. I mean, it could fit anywhere from a youth, high school, college, club, even some pro seasons would look very similar. But basically looking at off season, transitioning to preseason, and then in season. And the idea is creating it that so people, I mean, you could even, right now everyone's off, and a lot of people because of COVID don't know when their season is going to start up, which actually makes it's stressful to not know when your season is going to start, but you do know you have plenty of time because there's a good chance in Australia or New Zealand you're not playing rugby in 2020.
Which one should they be doing right now? The off-season one?
They would be jumping into the off-season. The beauty of the off-season is it starts with what we call general physical preparation. And the idea of that is you're not looking so much as like what position you play or what are your individualized weaknesses or strengths. General prep training or GPP is targeting everything that we need. So proper mobility and flexibility is always going to be hit in the warm-ups. Your strength work, it's a little more strength, endurance, and work capacity. So getting a good amount of volume with all your primal patterns, your squat, lunge, hinge, push, pull, all the different variations. And typically during that, you're going to get better at those movements because you're not necessarily prioritizing heavy weights. So, a lot of people have used quarantine as a reason to get out of shape, or if they've been doing anything, they've been doing body weight, very simple stuff at home. They haven't been really challenging themselves. General preparation is a great place to start because whether you're out of shape or you're fit, there's rep ranges that can allow you to challenge yourself. And a lot of places are still closed down. In general prep, we're relying on minimal equipment. You don't need, trap bars and Olympic lifting platforms and all the big stuff in your first couple phases of a general prep. We're using dumbbells or kettlebells, a lot of body weight. Your field work is simple. It's outside, it's movement. You don't need any equipment. You don't need any training partners. So it's a pretty easy place for most people to jump off, especially if they've been somewhat sedentary over this time, like a lot of people have. And the idea with off season is to really prepare your body to get into preseason, which is when you'd at least start thinking of like rugby based field sessions. That's part of your mindset, even if you're not practicing, but you're getting to that point of now I need a weekly schedule of I'm going to be doing gym sessions, field sessions. I know that if say games were going to start in January, we're looking at, November and December being preseason where we're actually going to start practicing twice a week. You obviously during the preseason, the difference between off season and preseason would be an increase in running volume, but everyone has to kind of play that game. Some teams, if they're going to be practicing, they're going to be running their asses off. So you shouldn't be doing a ton of extra running. You might do a speed session, an agility session for more skill-based work. And then you have off-feet options where you might be hitting rower workouts or spin classes or, VersaClimb or off-feet conditioning. So you're not adding more pounding on the joints because you're already running a ton in the practices. You're going to get a little more into the strength and power and what we call linear periodization in the preseason, which is that basic, all right, you got your first block is hypertrophy. So now you're taking all this general prep. You've got a pretty good base, and now you got a month you're trying to pack on muscle. Because the reality, and I've lived this the last couple summers, once you start running, you're going to lose weight, everybody. So if you can do a good hypertrophy, and hopefully that's built on some muscle you already built up in the off-season plan, when you start increasing more of the running during your maximum strength and power phases, essentially because you're practicing, you're not going to just drop all this weight. A lot, obviously there's some positions, props or whatnot, who might be trying to lose some belly fat maybe, but we're talking about muscle mass, and there's no player who wants to lose muscle mass going into a season because that's essentially hard to hold on to when you're running as much as you do in rugby. No matter how much you eat, the work capacity, the calorie expenditure is huge. So build the muscle and keep it while you can. Then you get into a maximum strength where you're really trying to basically optimize you got to look at your max strength for rugby is really your engine for power outputs. Rugby is a violent collision sport and it's a high speed sport. So if you have a strong strength base, whether it's in contact situations or bursting as far as accelerating or making a tackle, cutting, changing direction, you want to be strong. And we always say strength is your best form of injury prevention. So if you're strong and moving well, you can never eliminate injuries, but you can lower the risk of them. And obviously in rugby, there's always constant risk of it. The stronger and sturdier you are going into the season, the better your foundation is. It's higher. If you go into a season out of shape, you just open yourself up for more chance of injury because your body's not prepared for what you're about to get into in games and practices.
And the good thing is the Inside of Rugby X, everything is organized for them. For anything they need, the warm up, how to increase your speed, how to increase your power, and everything is completely organized.
Absolutely. And we built out because I know, just like I said earlier about people in our field are usually better at learning by doing. Athletes would also rather watch something than read something. So even though we have it all written out, we have videos to go along with everything. As we have the movement preparation and speed and agility drills from the ebooks. We have exercise technique videos, all our major things. We even have a couple tutorials on some of the more specific things that people might not have experience with. But I've done this for a long time before. I've had college buddies tell you, send me a program. I've had family friends. I've had athletes I used to work with. Hey, text me a program. If you don't have videos to go along with it, you have to keep it so simple that they really screw it up. But I knew I didn't want, whether it's our ebooks or Rugby X, I didn't want to have to oversimplify it just because people were going to have to guess. And the last thing I wanted them to do is have to go on YouTube and find 10 different crappy examples of what I wrote down. So we have videos that go with everything. People recognize guys like Todd and Carlin. One of my old coaches, Derek, who played for the Legion and on back. He's a beast in the weight room, and he's the training model in a lot of the videos. Perfect technique. The idea is we want people, like I said earlier, great programs they're a dime a dozen. But if you do them for the right reasons, you do them at the right time of the year, that's where the planning comes in. And if you do them the right way, the how, that's the biggest key. And if people can watch the videos, understand the technique, there's extra verbiage on the more technical stuff. And then we're obviously always available to answer questions. But I've always, ever since I was helping with getting programs done, or what me and Carlin did back in the day, I wanted people to actually be able to use it. I didn't want people to pay and buy some spreadsheet for me of an Excel doc. It could be the NASA program for rugby strength and conditioning, like just so science-based and amazing, blah, blah, blah. But if your average person can't follow it, then it's useless to me. And the whole point of doing this is to help people. And I've always had the passion to grow rugby in America, and knowing how much we're missing is the strength component. I didn't want this to be something that was so advanced that people open it and are like, what am I supposed to do with this? I'm not a health and exercise science major. I don't have a certification. Like, this is something that a teenager could open up, follow along, and improve with, and not feel like they can't handle it on their own. The exercise progressions are pretty straightforward and linear. I'm huge on like earning it. Even in NAKOA with our action sports, they see all the cool stuff on Instagram. Hey, when am I going to do that? I'm like, when you earn it. And if you can't do a good goblet squat with a dumbbell, then you're sure as hell not ready for your own weight on your back with a barbell. Earn it. So rugby
and it works for anybody who's a beginner all the way to pro. Is that right?
That's the idea. Is the off-season general prep. I mean, beginners could do it with body weight and get their butts kicked and whoop themselves into shape for the first 1 to 2 months, and then start easing load in. If you're already fit, you could still start with the off-season general prep. You would just be loading things earlier. And if you're working those rep ranges with moderate load, you're going to get a heck of a lot of work capacity and probably some hypertrophy, which is muscle building, out of it. But the whole idea is looking at it like, what's the real goal? Is to get to in season and feel good and ready to dominate, and also last the whole season. So the one thing I'll mention at the end is, in the in-season phase, we have two things that I've learned from myself and working with a lot of veteran athletes who know how much you have to prioritize the sport over the training when you're in season, is exercise variability, and then also variable volumes. So what that means is, say, in season, your rep schemes, you have like an option. You could have 3 to 5 sets and say 4 to 8 reps of something. The idea being, hey, you played your ass off and you're beat to hell and it's Tuesday and you got training that night and you're supposed to do a lift. Here's the moderate to low volume version of it. It's better than nothing. You can continue to adapt and improve, but you're not smashing yourself. Or you're the weight room junkie. Every team's got a couple of them. Or you barely played last weekend. Maybe you had an injury. Maybe you just didn't get off the bench and you're super pissed. You can still train your ass off that next week. You don't have the wear and tear that the other players who played more do. So that's where the variability of volume comes in.
Right.
And then also that that's the auto regulation, excuse me. And then we have the volume exercise selection. So this is where you create buy-in. When I'm sore as shit and you tell me I have to back squat and I freaking hate back squatting, guess what? If I'm an athlete and I'm not in front of my coach, I'm not going to do it. So, but if you said you can do goblet squats for a little more volume and just use a heavy dumbbell, and I can get four sets of 6 of a really good squat, I'm still doing a knee dominant pushing exercise. So just because it wasn't the exact variation of set lift does not mean it doesn't help. And that's where exercise variability I've noticed, and that's become a big trend in all pro sports, is these guys are not robots. If you give them a little bit of options, or these guys, these girls, give them some options. You know, you can do an overhead med ball throw, or you can do a kettlebell swing, or you can do RDLs for speed. All 3 of those is a high speed hip hinge. They seemingly, to athletes' minds, might be all different exercises. They're just a different version of the same movement.
Right.
And if you get a little say within that, then all of a sudden they're not so pissed at their strength coach for giving them that movement on a Monday after a game, because they realize, oh, I can do 3 sets of 5 just med ball throws. I can handle that. Versus like, I freaking hate RDL, so now I'm just going to skip it altogether. So that in season is meant, the training is meant to make them continue to progress in season, but to understand the mental and emotional stress is going to be ramped up because you're playing games and the practices are more intense because you're earning your spot in practice. So you want the workouts to be like de-stressing and something they actually look forward to. And if they are more of the same as the preseason, and if they're too hard and if they're too rigid, then it's easy for people to say, you know, F it, I'm not even going to do it. So that's a part of why we created that, is that the soft side of training, as far as if there's no buy-in from the athlete, then it's going to, they might train their, and I've been on teams like this, train their ass off until the first game, and then players just go into survival mode. They lift whenever they feel like it, and they think they're just going to run enough in practice to keep their fitness up. And you see the guys who stay on it get better as the season go, and then all the other survivors, it's like this, off a cliff. And obviously the whole point is to have success, and most success is earned at the end of seasons. So if you're not training consistently through it, you increase your chance of injury, but you also decrease your chance of like team success. And that's the whole point.
Hey, I'm super grateful that you came on today so that we could go through this. I wanted Rugby Nation to get to know you better, and I also wanted for you to explain what's in Rugby X, what the benefits and all that stuff. I know you've got a training session starting right now, but but seriously, the passion that you have for rugby and the passion that you have for strength and conditioning is unmatched. So happy to be working with you, and so happy that we get to actually help rugby players from around the world to be able to make them better athletes, to be able to perform at a higher level.
That's the plan, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, have a good day.
Take care. Have a good one.
See ya.